Welcome to the TCBC Bicycle University for March 6, 2025. This is the second episode of the 2025 TCBC Bike Year. My name is Edward Ero, and I'm the coordinator for Bike U. Tonight, we have a panel discussion titled Fundamentals of Group Riding. That's with Paul Arsenault, Gene Bentley, Carol Fitzgerald, and Scott Larson. Before we get to the program, however, I have a few short announcements. This is the second session of Bike U for the 2025 TCBC Ride Year. If you have not heard the previous session on bicycling into your 80s and beyond, and the sessions from the 2024 Ride Year titled the Tuesday Tune-Up Ride, Bicycle Commuting, Bicycle Maintenance, Randonneuring, the Minnesota Bicycle Alliance, and Free Bikes for Kids, as well as all the sessions from 2023 and 2022, please do so. It's a great thing to go into, on a rainy day and stuff, to go back and look at the sessions and listen to them and watch them. You get to them off the main Bike U page, off the TCBC website, where you'll find the link to each session and a write-up where, and that takes you to the YouTube channel where all the recordings are located. The recording of the session tonight will also be up after the conclusion of the meeting and after I have had time to edit and post it to YouTube. That's usually sometime tomorrow, because I like to go through everything, and if there's any problems, to do that, and then I have to upload to YouTube, and then Mary and I write up the summary too to put on the website. I want to thank our TCBC Bike U Council of Regents, which includes John Benda, Tim Rand, Dan Miller, and Mary Miller. If anyone else would like to join the council, please contact me, as we welcome others to participate, and we want the council to be representative of the entire club. And additionally, that we cover subjects that you would like to hear. During the session tonight, please keep your audio muted, but do keep your video on so that we can show who is in attendance tonight. Remember, we are recording. If you don't have yourself on mute and make any noise, it switches to your video, and thus the recording gets messed up. There will be a question and answer session after the presentation, but during the meeting, you can enter questions in the Zoom chat function. We will be monitoring those questions and make sure they get answered during the Q&A. Please do not interrupt the speakers to ask questions during the presentation. It just makes for a really nice recording. I would like now to introduce Mary Miller, who has coordinated tonight's session and will be the moderator. Mary was a Bike U coordinator in the past and has been a ride leader since 2004, leading up to 50 rides per year in her earlier years with TCBC. Mary will provide an introduction for each of the speakers. So over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Edward, and welcome panel and audience to this TCBC Fundamentals of Group Riding discussion and question and answer session. This panel discussion has decided to start off our riding season so that new and veteran riders both have a better idea of what the ride briefings are all about and will really take them to heart. And hopefully we will have an increased level of comfort, courtesy, and safety riding together as a large group on TCBC rides. Our hope is that this program will provide a solid framework for all levels of riders. Now, I'd like to give a brief introduction for each of our panelists. You may have read their bios at the biketcbc.org website. First, we have Paul Arsenault. Paul? There he is.
Hello.
Who has a long history of riding, racing, and coaching cycling, including organizing the 1982 Minnesota Ironman. And he has been a TCBC member since its inception. And I think you were a ride leader too, weren't you, Paul?
I've never been a ride leader.
Okay.
As far as the 82 Ironman, that was my first organized ride that I wasn't involved in starting.
Anyway, we invited Paul because of his expertise. So next we have Gene Bentley. Gene, there she is. Gene has a long history with TCBC as well since 2000, presently serving on the board as our safety liaison and is a ride leader as well. And I think you've been leading rides weekly, pretty much. Sometimes several rides a week, right, Jean? And Carol Fitzgerald has a long history of cycling and cross-country ski racing. She is a very active ride leader with TCBC and is well respected for her leadership of over 100 well-attended rides the last few seasons. And Scott Larson has served TCBC on many capacities. He's one of our expert web guys for our wonderful website. And he has served over the years since he joined in the 90s, and he became a ride leader in 2002, and presently serves in that capacity, leading rides weekly throughout the season. That said, let's get into the meat of our questions. I will first address each question to one of you, but all of you are encouraged to add a comment as you desire. First, would each of you provide your 3-minute group riding history, including what level of ride that you usually enjoy and or lead? Paul, would you begin?
I've been riding for 40 plus years with various groups, including TCBC. I was involved with TCBC since the beginning. I've raced with Gopher Wheelman for 20 years or so. I was involved with the founding of North Star Development Cycling, which is a junior bicycle racing team. And I usually do AB rides, maybe more B rides now than I used to, but that happens. Yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing.
Okay, Jean?
Yeah, I start out the season usually doing BC. Takes, even doing spin classes in the winter takes your legs and the rhythm a while to get up to what I enjoyed doing as B. But I usually will put on the Urban Growler. We've been, Tom Melcher and I have been putting on the Urban Growler for 10 plus years in the St. Paul area on Tuesday nights, and then since we've moved out here to White Bear Lake area, Friday night special from Bald Eagle on Friday nights and into Washington County, and that's a B ride that I like to lead. Yeah, but I'll go on AB rides sometimes, but I'm usually in the back. Yeah, that's about it.
Scott?
Hi. I joined TCBC in 2000. Before that, I sort of did Ironman and riding with friends and stuff. But when I started with TCBC in 2000, that's the first time I really was riding with groups. I became a ride leader a year later, and I've led and ridden, I don't know, 20 to 50 rides almost every year since. Generally, I would consider myself a low A rider and maybe AB. The rides that we do that I'm in the Northeast Metro, my speeds would say that I'm an A rider, but reality when I'm out there riding is that I'm an AB rider. I end up leading rides that have the A designation, but I usually let a group go off the front because I simply can't ride with those people anymore. On another point, I've ridden with different groups in different places. And my observation is that different groups ride based on where they are based. So clubs that are in the flats ride fast on it. They're amazing on the flats. People who are on the hills, they're amazing on the hills. In the Twin Cities here, we have a real mixture. So different rides are different. That's my group riding history.
Thank you, Scott. My cursor doesn't always want to be where it's supposed to be. Carol.
Okay, I rode a bike most of my life. I joined TCBC when we moved to Minnesota. I also organized group rides up in Hayward for both locals and cabin people, mostly on weekends when we had our cabin. I would have anywhere from 5 to 25 riders up there, depending on who was in town. My husband and I both raced the Firehouse 50 up in Grandview, Wisconsin several times on our tandem, and also on 4-person time trial teams. For a few years, I organized rides for the Berkey for foundation members in town for their annual meeting. I did that for Ben. I became a TCBC ride leader in 2012 or 13, I can't remember. Early on, I led and rode a few B rides when I was younger and stronger, but now I lead and ride BC rides. That's it.
Thank you, Carol. Well, as long as you kind of have the stage, just stay unmuted. I'd like you to start out on the next question. How important do you think the TCBC ride leader briefing is, and what points do you really feel you like to emphasize on your rides, and how important do you think it is for the riders to actually take those to heart and adhere to them?
Okay, BC rides, that's where I'm coming from. The ride leader briefing is pretty important, especially if I have new riders come on a ride, which I do, fairly often. If I know everyone, I've ridden with them before, and I don't have any new riders, I mention some of my hot spots, which are stay to the right, single file on most roads. If there's a snow shoulder, if there's a shoulder, ride on it, and not on the white line or out in the traffic lane. When someone yells car back, get your butt over, communicate with your fellow riders about debris, slowing, stopping, etc. I sometimes tell them, kind of jokingly, I guess, but if you're going to do something stupid, tell the riders around you so they can get out of your way. And that's kind of my briefing.
That's Carol. She's pretty straight and also pretty humorous. Thanks, Carol. Okay. The rest of you can just, whoever wants to go next.
I'll speak to that a little bit. I agree with Carol about the safety stuff and that kind of stuff, and the new riders. It's important to focus on newer riders and make sure that we recognize them. I think one of the most important parts of the briefing is it shows that we're paying attention to the other riders on the group. If we just said, "Oh, go out and ride," that's not the same as sort of having a little briefing and saying, "Hey, we're paying attention. We know you're here. We want you to have a good, fun, safe ride," that kind of stuff. And the other thing that I think is important with the ride briefing is to set expectations. Some rides, like I was on Carol's ride the other day, and we went off. I took a separate group off, and the expectation was that it was a BC ride, and the group I was in, we were going to ride maybe closer to a B ride, but we weren't going to go to an A ride. We weren't going to do anything like that. We weren't going to be dropping people. It was the expectations were set by Carol, and that was the expectations that we wanted to have throughout the ride. I think that, to me, those are the most important parts of a ride briefing.
Go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I agree with both of those comments, but I do say I think most people really kind of tune that whole thing out and don't pay a lot of attention. There probably could be a long conversation on what could be said in the ride briefings that might be different, but that's probably something for another time.
Well, actually, I think that's one of the reasons that Linda Evans suggested that we do this panel discussion. So anything that you want to add, Paul, I think it's probably the most important question we're going to have on this panel. So feel free.
I'll add one more thing to that. I think that the ride briefing card is good, and there's a lot of good points on it. But any of the leaders who are giving a ride briefing, if we go through and we read every point on the briefing card and that's what we're doing, nobody's listening to us. We're Charlie Brown's teachers. Blah, 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 blah. My view is the ride briefing is set expectations and maybe bring up some hot points. And that's the way I look at the ride briefing. I agree that we sometimes drone on and it's too much.
Yeah, I think pointing out some things on that particular ride, maybe there's some areas where you need to slow down or maybe even regroup or different things on a particular ride rather than just something that's the same thing all the time. So that's my take on it.
Well, I think there are a lot of important things on the ride briefing. I agree that, it gets, a little repetitive for all of us who have done hundreds of rides, right? And so, like Carol said, if everybody in the group, I mean, the group has been on multiple rides, you can just highlight, the hot spots on the route that, you need to be aware of and, accentuate the car back. But, this part that's highlighted on the ride briefing is, it's all the briefing is a part of risk management. And so, I think, especially, just if there's no new people, just remind riders that TCBC rides are all expected to ride safely, obey the traffic laws, share the road and trails, and be helpful to and responsible to each other. It's still, I think, important to go through those other safety reminders, though. Maybe it's the nursing background in me, and prevention is so key. But most of these things that are on here are on the briefing, on the safety reminders, are there because accidents have happened. And so even though we've heard it multiple times, sometimes hearing it one more time might make a difference. So I'm one of those that rarely, skip things. I'll just because I think it's so important.
Let's go on to the next question. No matter what level of ride, what do you believe are basic fundamentals of all group rides? For instance, are there differences too, perhaps not fundamentals, but the manner of riding in an A or an AB ride compared to a B and a BC ride? Paul, how about if you start on this one? Are you ready for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the fundamentals on the rides, whether it be A, B, C, or whatever, should be all the same. Riding predictably, riding in a straight line, all the things that you should be doing. It shouldn't matter what speed you're going, they all should be done no matter what. So when you see a group go down the road, you shouldn't be able to say, well, that's a C group or that's an A group, other than by the speed. You could still ride straight lines when you're riding at a slower speed. All the skills that you need to ride apply, whether you're going 20 miles an hour, you're going 12 miles an hour. Maybe making corners at 12 is a lot easier than it is making at 25, but all those skills apply whether you are going fast or slow, and you can really enjoy a slower ride, but still do all the things that you would do on a fast ride, other than you're just doing it slower. So I think I don't see any differences in the skills that you should have. And that's kind of about it.
Scott, how about like pace lines? Since you do a lot of A and AB rides.
One thing that I would say is that AB racing, they're more likely to be doing structured pace lines, where everybody in the group is counting on other people in the group, helping them along on the ride. There's still group rides. People are still having a fun, but they tend to be riding tighter. Nobody wants to lose their spot in the line because they might get dropped. But the rules are still the same. Sometimes when you get on some other rides that I'm on, and I go on all levels of ride, they're still riding in groups, and there's still sort of this line, but people aren't really counting on one another quite as much to create a draft. They're maybe more conversational, out there enjoying the ride for different reasons. But everybody rides the same at the different levels. But certainly the A, B, the faster rides, they're riding tighter, and the people are maybe more focused on the wheel in front of them. And that's not for everybody, but that is for a lot of people. They're both, all of these rides are fun, but they are a little bit different.
I don't think I need to call on each of you for each question. I'll just call on one person to start the discussion. But let's leave it this way. If you want to add something, then go ahead and add it. And if not, we'll just go on to the next one.
Yeah, I think just, the basic fundamentals for all rides are predictability. Like Paul said, if you, just not wavering a lot, keeping the same cadence when you're making a turn, not making a wide turn, just, being predictable so the person behind you can count on you kind of keeping the same pace, no matter if it's an A, B, or A, or B, or B, C. Would you agree, Carol?
Yeah, BC rides, a lot of BC riders are not real comfortable riding 6 or 8 inches from the wheel and, the rear wheel. So I don't worry about a lot of pace lines. Every once in a while, I've done it. A couple times this year, we did a pace line when the route works for it, and the riders, I know the riders, I know they're good, I know they're comfortable doing that. I lay down the rules. This is what you got to do. You're out there a short time, and it's worked. We've had a good time doing it, but it has to be the right route, the right conditions on the road and the right group of people to do that. Otherwise, BC rides, we don't do that much. But BC riders do ride single file. I mean, in my rides, they're pretty good. I have to say, occasionally I see A groups and, A, B, and B groups going down the road in a clump, which is not good. 20 riders going down the road is, I tend to break up if I have more than 8 or 10 riders, I always joke that if there's more than 8 riders on my ride, somebody has to go home. So I try to, if I have 15 or 20 riders, I try to split the group up. I always try to do that and have a faster group or whatever, because I don't like to see a whole pack of bikes going down the road. So that's just mine.
Thank you all. Okay, what you said, Jean, kind of ties into our next question, because I'd really like you folks to define and address the importance of holding your line, addressing the accordion effect or pedaling and coasting, sudden stops, and how to politely pass other riders. And you can break this down into individual items and just speak to one or speak to, we can speak to each one of them as we go through, making this kind of a long question, but it's probably the meatiest question we have on the discussion tonight. So, Scott, would you start on this one?
One of the things that I'm going to say is that, like holding the line, all riders, when we're riding in a group ride, all riders are counting on the person in front. Whoever's in front, if there's anybody behind you, you're in front of somebody. All riders in the group are depending on the person in front of them. So if you're in the very front, you better be having a nice line. Next in line, you gotta continue that. And that continues all the way from the front to the back, where everybody has to be holding that line. Everybody has to be behaving. It's a problem if the person in the front drifts to the left and drifts out into the road, and we find them, and then because everybody else behind them is following that person, counting on that person to lead them to safety. And if that person is taking the whole group on a bad path, that's not a good look, and it's certainly not a safe thing. That's what I would like to say. That's just the start of what I would say, is that if you're in front of anybody, somebody's following you and they are counting on you.
Can I just talk about that a little bit and expand on it? The person in the front, or if there's two in the front, their main job is to control that group and lead the group around things, not just at the last second skip by a pothole or something on the road. If there's something, an obstacle or hazard in the front, their job is to move the whole group out. You know, they got to be safe because there's traffic, but that's the job. And the people behind, their job is to know what's going on in front of them, not just the one person right in front of them, but people 1, 2, or 3 up ahead. So you're kind of looking over the shoulder. You're not staring at the person's wheel. So you need to know when things are going to happen, because they do. There'll be numerous hazards in the road. And so everybody's got to be aware that if you've got people behind you, they're not going to see things until it's maybe too late. So you have to direct them. So if there's a parked car, then you bring the group out a little ways, looking over your shoulder, make sure there's no traffic coming. That's the main thing to keep everything safe.
So Paul and Scott, being more A/B riders, do you still call like hazards out and potholes out and point? You don't point as much, or do you still? I mean, I just feel like, if it's not safe to get your hands off the bars, calling it out and then making sure it's, for everybody else just to be aware, then pass it back when you hear it, because someone's going to hit that hole. But I just don't hear the A, B, or A riders do that much, maybe because they're just more into going around things more, or I don't know. I still think it's important to do that. So, or if you're passing on the left, say on your left, if you're coming in because there's a car up and you have to single file. I mean, just say coming in, and usually somebody will tell you, go ahead. But anyway, I just am curious, do you still call those things out?
If I can talk on that a little bit, pointing out is fine, and communicating with everybody if there's something going on. I think that's a good idea. I'm not big on yelling, and even taking your hands off. You have to be careful. You want to be safe in taking hands off the bars. But yelling, I myself, when I'm in the group and people start yelling, I get startled. and also sometimes people yell out really small things, and then you start thinking, well, they're yelling for this, and it's not a big deal. So I think the biggest thing is just communicating to a certain extent, but mainly pulling people around things and giving them time to move over, and not at the last second have to avoid a big pothole. The little ones aren't that big a deal. I mean, I think we can all hit a small little hole and not be too bad. So I think just kind of moving over, maybe pointing it out or just mentioning it. You don't have to yell and scream. It scares people.
I agree with Paul there. I think the faster groups, especially if the group is really sort of pushing it, that the people everybody is counting on everybody else a lot more to lead us around things, and it may not work to take your hands off the handlebars. And I have mixed feelings about the yelling. I think that it can be scary when you're hearing sounds. You really are when I'm riding in these groups that are really moving down the road, I'm really counting on the people in front of me to be leading me in a nice path. And I should not be out of the line. I should be following the person in front of me. I should not be out on the edge trying to see around everything. That's not my role. I really do have to be counting on the people in the front. Pointing things out. And there are certain times when yelling might make sense, where some emergency dog or something. But for the most part, you're not going to hear a lot of verbal communication when the group is really moving down, when their hands are in the lower bars and everybody's sort of pushing themselves. Everybody is counting on the other people in the group to lead them to safety.
I agree with you guys.
That makes sense.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead. You go ahead, Carol.
That you're counting on people to lead you and stuff. But I think the yelling thing, I understand that. But the car back thing, I mean, I've seen groups of bikes going down the road and somebody saying car back, and there's 2 or 3 cars backed up behind you that are trying to get around you, and there's bikes out, beyond the shoulder or whatever. So, I mean, that's just not good. I'm sorry. It's bad if you're a driver, and it's bad if you're a biker. So, I had a couple more things, but go ahead.
No, go. You finish up, Carol.
Mary mentioned the accordion effect thing, and I've ridden with faster riders who tend to pedal, and then coast. And there have been some, what I thought were good riders that do that. And I think that's kind of a bad habit also, to do that, because that causes what we call the accordion effect, where riders behind are all of a sudden slowing down and then speeding up. So if you're out in front, and I don't know, maybe it's not a problem with A and AB rides and stuff, but I've seen it in B rides, and again, it's just not a good thing to do. You need to maintain a constant speed if you're out front. The other thing, if you're in a string of bikes and you want to pass someone, and this happens on B rides or it happens on BC rides, because they're riding erratically, they're weaving all over the road, they're slowing down on uphills or downhills or whatever. You tell them you'd like to pass them for whatever reason, their taillight's giving you a migraine, whatever. But let them know you want to pass them and communicate with them. And I think that's true with all level rides too. Sometimes a gap opens up and you want to get around somebody. You need to tell them you're doing that. You need to communicate that to them. And I don't think a lot of people do that. What else? Yeah, some riders don't have speedometers, which can cause a problem too, as far as maintaining a constant speed. So yeah, that was it.
Nobody addressed sudden stops. Let's cover that really quickly because that's really important. And what do we do when we stop? Do we just stop right there in the line? What do we do? How do we do it?
If I could say something about that, sometimes there's no choice. I mean, if something happens in the front, that's obviously a problem. But being aware of what's going on up front will help with that. Not being too close. You don't necessarily need to be that close. Give yourself a little room and be aware of what's going up ahead in front of you, 2 or 3, 4 riders ahead, so that if it does slow down really fast or actually stops, then you're not running into somebody. Just like with a vehicle, if you hit somebody from the back, it's your fault. You were too close. Now, in bike riding, there's an inherent risk when you're riding with people and you're riding right behind them that something could happen and they have to jam their brakes on. Unfortunately, it does happen, but being aware of what's going on, looking up ahead, will help prevent that most of the time.
So accordion effect is when you're changing cadence. Is that what you mean by accordion effect, Carol?
Where the back has to chase to catch back up because the front of the ride feels nice, but the back of the ride, they're working like crazy because it speeds up and slows down, speeds up and slows down.
Okay.
And one thing with the accordion effect, as further you go back, it kind of magnifies things. So if near the front, if they're slowing up and speeding down, it just kind of magnifies as it goes back. So the person in the back is really getting it, and it doesn't seem as bad near the front. But that person in the back is constantly speeding up and slowing down. And that's where you get the accordion effect.
Okay. Yeah, as far as sudden stops, so Mary, I mean, there's times where people have stopped suddenly, in an emergency. They drop their water bottle or whatever, or sometimes they didn't see a stop sign, they were out ahead of you, and and you're right behind them and didn't look up. So I mean, that happens sometimes. We do more communicating on the B&BC rides, like Carol was saying. If we're stopping, we call it out. We don't, stopping, or do your signal, with your arm, I think it's slightly bent, or even if you put it just down to the side, it communicates, if you can safely put your hand off the bar, and usually do it on the left side so it's safe enough to do that. So there's not a sudden stop with somebody right behind you who may not know that there's something coming up. Yeah. If there is somebody who's having a problem, and not communicating, and jutting out in front of you, I mean, just be respectful and confront them in a discreet way aside from the group, and just say, just be aware, just communicate when you're coming in the line. So that's only respectful.
One thing I would say with some of these things is kind of know who you're riding with sometimes. I kind of look and see who I'm in a group with and who I want to be behind, if I can try to do that. If I know somebody is squirrely, then I'm going to try to not be near that person. If I know somebody who's a smooth rider, that's the person I want to be next to or on sitting behind them.
Nobody mentioned, if we're on a bike trail and we come to a stop, people tend to clump up right at that point. So what do we do to avoid that? Nobody's talked to them about that at all. Do we just take up the whole bike trail?
Can I say something about that? And that applies to coming up to stop signs or red lights. Stay in the same position you are in when you come up to it. If you're first, stay first. If you're in the back, stay in the back. If you're riding two abreast, stay two abreast. Don't spread out. Don't come around everybody. So you should stay in at a stop sign or a red light in the same position you were in going into it, and that would certainly apply on a trail. There's cars on the road. They have they're going to come. They want to come by. That just ticks them off when we come to a red light and everybody takes the whole road. We shouldn't do that. If there's a right turn lane, we should stay out of the right turn lane also. Let cars turn and just stay on the left side of that right-hand turn and let cars pass.
I just have a couple things. Occasionally, I know traffic lights change really fast. And I have actually told riders, if we're going straight across or whatever, I've told riders to clump up and move up a little bit and, kind of be a pack if it's safe to be in that lane, because I know the light's going to be really fast, even when it's got one of those push button things. So sometimes that's necessary. And the right turn lane thing, I've told riders to stay in the straight ahead lane while I usually go push the button. But you also have to be careful if you're out there pushing the button that somebody doesn't turn right in front of you while you're on the path doing the button. So that's just another safety thing.
Thank you, panel. I think you covered it pretty thoroughly. So this kind of flows into the next question, which is, how do predictability, consistency, and courtesy intersect with safety on group rides? And Jean, that's kind of your department, I think. Go for it.
So we talked about that a little bit already: predictability, consistency, courtesy, with safety on group rides. I had made notes here, passing down communications. Yeah, I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say about that, Mary. Does anybody else?
I have a couple of points more about courtesy. One of the things is, like when you're on a group ride, and don't drop the leader. Don't drop the person who's trying to keep the group together if something happens. Unfortunately, I've seen that happen where the person who's been doing all the work, corralling the troops, and somewhere along the path, they got dropped. How does that happen? That's not very courteous. Other things that I would say from a courtesy point of view, and I sometimes, especially like in the fall when the sunlight's getting to be an issue, I'll tell the group that if somebody has a flat tire, that we only want 2 or 3 people stopping for that flat tire. We don't want everybody stopping because the light's getting short, and we want to make sure that most people get a nice ride. And if 2 or 3 people have to cut the ride short because they stopped for a flat tire, well, it was only 2 or 3 people. It wasn't the whole group. And the other thing about that for flat tires or mechanicals or something like that, if you're riding in a ride that has multiple groups in it, if there's a mechanical or a flat tire or something happens, in general, you should only have to stop for your own group. You shouldn't have to stop if somebody in one of the separate groups has a flat tire. Each group should be taking care of themselves. That's not pure. There's some people who are just really good at doing this or that, and they may be able to help. But in general, I would say that each group should be taking care of themselves, and it's not the responsibility of other people to come along and fix everything. Now, they should be available. They should ask, does anybody need help, potentially? But it really should not be the responsibility of people in another group to help out another group. Those are just sort of courtesy things that I want to talk about there. For one big thing about that is we don't want 25 people standing on the side of the road watching 2 people change a flat tire. That's what I guess that's the only thing that I have to say on this one.
Yeah, it made me think of something as far as courtesy. I've seen a lot of times, somebody's stopped and obviously, I don't know if they'd have a simple mechanical chain problem or flat tire, but, just to yell out, you need help, and if they said, yeah, just, pull over, safely as you can, but being sure that you're safely off the route. Sometimes there's been, like you say, Scott, a lot of people, and then they're way out in the road, and other people have to go out into the road more to get around them, and that's not a safe thing to do either. But yeah, just being courteous and calling out, though, if it looks like somebody needs help.
Finally, what other issues, if any, we've covered a lot of ground, do you feel are important in group rides that really ought to be mentioned here?
The most important thing that I think should be done is, especially when you're going with a group that you have not ridden with before, is observe. See what the riders are doing in whatever group ride you're on. And try to fit in with that group of riders that you're riding with. If you're on riding with a bunch of people who are doing a rotating paceline or something, try to fit into that. If you're into a group that's sort of socially riding down the trail and going 2 by 2 or something, so that 2 people are sitting next to each other talking, but not really pacelining, but more of a social ride, fit in with that. If everybody's riding in a line and the leader is leading them along at 12 miles an hour or 20 miles an hour, fit in with that. Whenever I ride with a new group, the first 15, 20 hour, I'm just sitting there watching to see, how does this group behave and where do I fit into it? And I want to make sure that I fit into it appropriately. That's, to me, one of the most important things, is that you fit in with whatever ride you're in and do your best to fit in with that. Sometimes I get on a ride and I'm with a bunch of racers and I'm like, I don't fit here at all. I guess I'll have to do something different. But I know that I didn't get out in front and cause a crash because I got out there thinking that I could ride with them. I sat in the back and I observed that they're too much for me. So I changed my mode of riding on that day. Observing other riders is really the most important thing, or a very important thing to having an enjoyable group ride and a safe group ride.
Yeah, I would agree for sure with Scott. I think it is important to know what group you're in and ride at that, whatever that pace happens to be, or if you can. If it's a slower group than you normally ride with, then do it. It can be fun. Even not going as fast as you want. You can have a lot of fun just talking to people that maybe you don't get to talk to very much because you're on a different ride. The other thing is going into a ride, not trying to. A lot of people come into rides and they want to show off. They want to show how fast they are, but they're not necessarily good riders. If somebody comes in, even if they're not super fast, but they're a good rider, that's what I would look for, is somebody that you can say, hey, that person I know has skills in riding. They know how to ride. Maybe they're not in as good a shape as they were at one time, or they're just not all that fast anyways, but you can tell they're a good rider because they know how to ride in the particular group they're in, and that is important.
Yeah, because it brings it up, Scott. When you're riding beyond your ability, you're putting yourself at risk and others at risk. I mean, I've been like on an AB ride, for instance, trying to keep up, and I'm not an AB rider. So you have to be aware, you're going to blow through a stop sign or try to go through a yellow when you shouldn't. And you're going to put yourself at risk. And then maybe someone behind you is trying to follow you. So yeah, it's really good to get a good feel and make sure you're aware of that.
In talking about going through lights and stuff, it's really important that the people in the front of the group are watching. If they're coming up to a light, let's say it's yellow, yeah, they can get through, but they got to be concerned that the people in the back, that they can get through when it's not red. So it's very important that people up front are aware of what's going on. So if they come up to the light and it's turning yellow, maybe they got to stop, because the people in the back are not going to get through, and they're going to want to because they don't want to lose the group. So when you're in lights and stop signs, you got to be aware of the group and how they can get through all those things. And you don't need to race through the city when you have lights and stop signs. You can do that out on the road if you want to do that. But in the city where you've got lights, you really need to be careful.
Okay, finally, let's just quickly address the new Idaho stop, and also stopping at, well, we did kind of talk about stopping on trails and stoplights. We covered that, so I think we can skip that. So finally, what are your thoughts on visibility? We didn't talk about that at all.
Can we just go back real quick for a
Yeah,
second?
we need to talk about that Idaho
on the
stop
stop
thing.
sign.
Okay.
It doesn't mean you can just fly through the stop sign, that they're not there. It's basically a yield sign. So if there are other cars around, then you have to stop. And we need to emphasize that, because it's not just ignore it. If there are other cars coming, you do have to stop.
There's two-way stops and there's four-way stops. And at a two-way stop, if you got the stop sign, you need to be careful because cars are going to go by. If it's a four-way stop and nobody's there, you can go through it. But I've seen people breeze through stop signs when, it says cross traffic does not need to stop, or whatever the sign says. And you just need to be careful. And I've seen some bad stuff with that. And not everybody knows, once in a while, somebody will yell at you in a car because people don't know that you can do that. And they, I've had people yell at me, nice stop, well, we didn't have to stop. We were there before you and we could go. But so, there's all kinds of issues with that. And people not knowing is one of them.
I'm with both Carol and Paul. I have really mixed feelings about the Idaho stop. I think it's been way too easy for some people to just pretend like it means that stop signs don't exist. They do exist. We have to be able to stop if there's traffic there. I've talked about it at ride briefings quite often, that you have to be able to stop at these stop signs when we're cupping up on them. I don't know how effective it's been. I still see people treating the stop signs less than I would like. But that's the law right now. We still have to, they are a yield sign. You do have to stop if there's traffic there. Don't ignore the stop signs.
Anything else anybody wants to add on this, or any other question before we close? Or go to questions and answers, actually.
Mary, did you cover the visible clothing?
Oh, we're talking about wearing visible clothing. Excuse me. What are your thoughts on riders wearing visible clothing and using front and rear lights, not just for night rides, but for day riding too? So that's one of my pet peeves. You know, and I am going to quote some research from Clemson University that they did into how conspicuous certain apparel and lights make cyclists during daytime. And so they summarized it by running full-time lights are better than no lights. And flashing light is safer than a steady light. And high vis on the moving parts make you even more conspicuous. So being conspicuous, having high vis on your torso or contrast, versus a brown or beige or black jersey, wearing contrast or some kind of high vis is much more conspicuous. But the green socks thing that Edward has been giving out with this Green Miles is part of this whole thing too, is the moving parts are even more conspicuous. And Clemson University got together with Bontrager, if I'm saying that name right, the brand name Bontrager, and they have to put together the ABCs of awareness, and A being always on, lights day and night, B being the biomotion part that I discussed, and C being contrast. So I think the more that of the ABCs that we practice on every ride, the more we stand out and the less likely we are to get hit. And we all have seen people with black, dark clothes and know that it puts us as drivers, at risk for hitting them. And so I think that's just something I want to pass down. So a lot of you have heard it. Sorry to repeat, but especially, for the new people, that's where the research is. So
I really like the idea of the blinky lights, especially a rear one. I think that's a great idea. I try to ride with one when I can remember to charge it or actually put it on my bike. But I think that's really a great idea.
The only thing that I would comment on is that having the blinky light when you're riding in a group might bother some people. So I strongly believe in having the light in the group, but I'm not convinced that we should have the blinky when you're riding with a group. The blinky should be on when you're riding on your own or onesie twosie kinds of people groups, but I'm not sure if the blinky light is the best move in a group ride. That it bothers some people.
Maybe if you're riding sweep. So thank you
lights.
so much, panel, for your great answers and your patience with my work in progress as it went. But now it's time for our listeners to have a chance to ask you questions. And here's hoping that all your advice will produce a safe, courteous, and fun riding season. So let's go to questions.
So I've got, Mary, there are some questions in the chat that I'll read off here. David Sandy, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name. You've had several questions here that are really good. Is it helpful to consider adding a ride leader designated as a sweep? So staying in the back of the group to communicate with cars as well as help someone if they have an issue, a flat, etc. So could you address the sweep? It's not something that we have standard, but I know a lot of rides do that.
I
Well,
like having a sweep.
Yeah, in the new ride leader training too, they talk about that. That when you put on rides, try to get somebody who will sweep for you. And yes, because we've all been there where we're just not having a very strong day, and then you get behind, and what if you have a flat? Then you're on your own, or or somebody's going a little faster. So we encourage the ride leaders have all been encouraged to have a sweep. So it doesn't always happen, but yeah, if anybody's a ride leader listening to this, just always ask, because a lot of people will step up. They may not want to lead the ride, but they'll be glad to co-lead it.
BC rides, if I have more than 6 or 8 riders, usually I ask somebody to sweep if I have another ride leader.
What I would say on the rides that I have is that I don't always have an official sweep, but there's certain riders that I ride with who I know will be sitting towards the back and will be acting as a sweep. It's a lot more comfortable when those people are on the ride than it is when they're not, or sometimes when I'm there. Like, I don't know any of these riders and I don't know anybody who can help me out with keeping this group together. That's a lot less comfortable than when I have some other riders with me that I know will help me make the ride a good group ride, whether it's an official sweep or not.
Gene, I'm real happy that they're covering that in the ride leader training now, because on the rides that I do, we generally have a sweep, and I've acted as that where, it's courteous too. Someone gets into trouble, has a flat tire or a mechanical problem, you always have someone that's there, or they're not feeling well, they're slow, that you're bringing everybody, back to the ride start. So Mary, I have a couple other questions that came through. And John Benda, I know you raised your hand, so I will ask you that too. Another question was, a significant safety issue is groups and how to handle riding on a road where there is no shoulder. Do you take the lane or do you stay completely to the right? How best to do that, with drivers and cars.
If I can talk about that, I think at that point you need to single up for sure and stay as far to the right as you can. You need to give cars room. You shouldn't be out in the middle of the road. But you also have to be safe too. So you got to be, if there isn't, you need to be as far to the right as it's safe to do. You don't have to be way to the right if there's a lot of stuff in the road. But it is safest to single up and ride as close to the right as you can.
Anybody else have a?
Yeah, Lyle has his hands up.
Oh, okay.
Lyle. Lyle, you're muted.
There we go. Somehow my space bar didn't work. One of the things that we haven't discussed tonight, and I have never heard it discussed in a ride briefing, is if you're riding two abreast, what's the proper protocol for merging back? I think everybody here knows that you're supposed to drop back rather than whipping in and cutting in front of the rider you're next to, but I haven't heard that addressed.
If I can take that one. The best way to do that is for the two people on the front, one move over to the left and one kind of go over to the right. You need a little room there on the right to do that and have the people come up in the middle and just have the two drop back. That's one way of doing it. The other would be for the one to move a bit to the left and come back, and the one who was on the right move over to the left, and then when they can, then they can pull off to the left too. You just kind of, depends on how much room you got in the shoulder. If you got enough room for them to drop back on both sides, that's probably the best way to do it. But if you don't, then just one at a time, kind of come off, slide over and drop back.
Are you talking like in a paceline or something?
I'm just talking in general. You know, I
Yeah.
always tell people to ride single file because
Right.
avoid the problem of having to drop back in. But and we know you don't want to whip in front of the rider on your right and cut off his front wheel. That's not a good thing. So
No.
you drop back, but that also means that the people behind you have to anticipate, so they leave space for that rider on the left to get back in the single file.
Yeah, I guess I just tell they need to tell them, you know, hey, I'm moving behind you, or you know, if there's a car back or something and you're riding two abreast, you need to say, I'm going to go ahead of you or I'm going to go behind you, and just tell them what you're doing, I guess.
And also signal.
Yes.
One thing is, you know, the people who are, if you're in the front and the people right behind you, when you start to come off, they should be anticipating that you're coming off. So you can signal to them that you're coming off. So, you know, they give you room to move over. But it all depends on the situation and how much room you have. If you have a big wide shoulder, it really shouldn't be that hard. You shouldn't have to go out into the middle of the road. That's probably the worst thing to do, is go out to the middle of the road. If you got a nice wide shoulder, you can just pull off to either side and let people come up the middle and drop back.
Yeah.
You're talking more of a baseline thing, Paul.
Well, no, not even just, I mean,
No.
just casually riding. If you're riding two up and you got maybe, let's say there's 6 or 8 people, and two and two, and the people in the front want to come off, you could do it one at a time. Person could just come over and come off.
Mhm.
You know, you don't have to go way out, just come back enough.
Yeah, right.
And then slow down and let yourself go off. And if you have the room over here, this person can come over here on the inside. It's just situational, how much room you have. If not, when this person pulls over, he can move over this way. And when he comes back, then he can come over. And it doesn't have to be a fast paced line. You can do it slowly.
I'm not talking about pace lines at all. I'm just talking about everyday riding when somebody's chatting away and somebody yells car back and you have to get back in.
But it's still a pace line, even no matter your speed you're going. If you're riding together, you're doing a pace, and if you're coming off and you're rotating somehow, it's a pace line. You're getting some draft. It's just, you can do it. It doesn't matter what speed you go. You can do it any way you want. And it's just how you do it, you know, safely. And and the person coming off needs to check behind them. So you either need to be able to look over your shoulder and see if there's cars coming, or have a mirror. You know, some of us start getting older and we can't turn as much, but you know, you really need to take a look back when you come out to make sure there's no cars coming.
I don't think that's what Lyles means at all, Paul. I'm sorry.
One comment I would make is, like, if you're riding double pace lines or not, you're just riding side by side, and a car's back and you have to single up because somebody will car back. One person has to speed up, the next person has to slide behind them. That's going to require communication between the different people. You have to be pointing it out. It's a communication issue. You just have to, and everybody in the group has to communicate with one another, and you have to say, I'll speed up, you get behind me throughout the group. And you really do have to count on everybody in the group paying enough attention so that they can give you the space to slide in. That's my view of how something like that would work. It's just a communication.
I agree. Yeah, you have to say, I'm coming in, or I'm going around, or whatever. You just have to tell them what you're doing.
Yep. Point to a spot, say, let me in here.
Yep, right.
So
I most often will say, I'll slow down and say, come on in, and signal them in ahead of me. That's the way I usually handle it. But I think what Lyle's speaking to, I've experienced many, many times on group rides where everybody's in a line except for maybe two people, and somebody else car back, and they haven't anticipated, they're busy in conversation, they're not paying attention. And that's one of the major issues with our group rides, is it's we really need to pay attention. And I have to say, in my early years, I was a lot chattier than I am now. And I would usually do a C ride or a more, conversational type of enjoyable ride if I wanted to ride that way. But I've been on many B rides where it just really isn't appropriate at all. Like on a bike trail, the leader has said specifically that I want you to stay single file on the bike trail because there's going to be bikes passing us and there's going to be oncoming bicycles, and we need to be courteous and safe to everyone. And some people will just totally ignore it.
yeah, we have, Mary, we have a couple other questions, and John Bend has had his virtual hand up for a long time. So John, I want you to be able to talk here. And then there'll be one other question from the chat. Go ahead, John.
All right. Thank you. Thanks to all of our panelists for the good advice they've shared with us. I did want to offer a different opinion on one of the questions having to do with the ride briefing. I think it's important to let the ride leader share whatever they want. If they want to go through the whole dang card, maybe they're a relatively new person, I think we owe them the respect, especially if we're an experienced rider, to act like we're listening to it, or to actually listen to it. Or maybe it's like we heard a couple of nice comments about stop signs. Maybe they want to make a point of how to behave at stop signs, but they put themselves out there, and a lot of times they know their ride better than anybody else, theoretically, and they deserve to hear us, to have us really listen to them, and those of us that are experienced to have the stance that we really are listening to them, so that everyone knows that that's an important thing to do. Just wanted to say that.
Thanks, John. Actually, there was another question just put in, but the one before, addressing passing on the right, that seems to, be an issue in a group ride. Is there a time that passing on the right is appropriate?
Occasionally,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, occasionally I've slipped to the back to find out what's going on. If we've dropped somebody or somebody's having a problem, and I've ride to the back and I've signaled everybody to pass me on the right so I can slide back on the left. So otherwise, no, it's unsafe.
I think it can be situational. I've been on a lot of rides where people are riding. We have a big shoulder, but they're all riding on the white line of the shoulder, and there's a big area in the inside. And we need to ride to the right. And if they got, rather than going, if I'm going to pass that person, if I have to go out into the middle of the road, I don't think that's very safe. So if there is a big enough room on the right, you should say something as you're coming up. But if somebody's giving you that much room, they got to know that somebody could pop in there. And that goes back to being aware of what's going on. And I think sometimes our group rides too far over to the left and leaves a lot of room on the shoulder. And when we don't have to, we have people out and partway into the middle of the road. And that kind of irritates me at times, but you have to live with it sometimes.
Okay, there's one other one, unless there's people that want to raise their hand and ask a question. But I think Ken Johnson had said something, if you hear car back for the third time, they might be talking to you. I think I interpret that too, as usually it's the person in the back that's saying car back, and it needs to be communicated up to the front of the line, or people are bunched up. So any comments on that?
One comment I would make on that is that we go on these rides and we have leaders. But my view on that is everybody in the group is responsible for making the group a successful ride. And that means when people are yelling car back, that everybody in the group should be listening to that and participating in that. In order for a ride to be successful, everybody is a leader. Everybody has to be playing their role. There isn't just the person sitting in the front. There isn't just the person who got up in the front and read the card and gave us our safety issues. A successful ride depends on everybody in the group riding together, and everybody is playing the role of a leader. They play it in different ways, but everybody is playing the role of a leader. And anybody can call somebody else out for saying, hey, Tom, John, you aren't getting in when we're yelling car back. Get in. It's all of us have that responsibility. It's not just the designated leaders of any ride.
Are you deaf or am I speaking Chinese?
Okay, and let's just do one more. George has a suggestion on singling up, on the singling up issue. George, did you want to ask that?
Yeah, well, it seems to me that one, and this might sound a little bit heretical because I haven't really heard this notion put forward, intervals. We all have it drummed into us as we take driver's training that we need to maintain an interval behind the car in front of us so that we have time to react to unexpected actions on the part of that car. So for the ride back, for the car back matter and singling up and a few other situations that have been brought up in this discussion, if you have one or two bike lengths between you and the next bike up, you've got kind of a built-in solution to a lot of situations, especially singling up when you have a car back situation. You've the line itself kind of creates opportunities for people to get into a single file line without disrupting the flow of things or risking, cutting somebody off. just tossing it out there. I mean, I know it's maybe not quite as social in the actual riding time, but maybe there's more socializing at rest stops and beginning and the end of rides. So, just for what it's worth. And I'm done with that at this point.
That's a good comment, George. The only problem is on some rides, if you leave a couple of bike links in front of you for that purpose, some squirrel will come and cut you off.
Yeah, but maybe that can be a matter that's addressed by the ride leader at the beginning of the ride. Say, if you see somebody maintaining an interval behind the bike in front of them, they might be doing that for a reason. So don't just consider that to be a spot that you can fill in without at least a, if you don't mind kind of remark, for what it's worth.
George, when you said intervals, I thought you were talking about more intensive training. Sorry. My brain's on the wrong thing.
That's another good place for intervals. You're right.
Intervals, yeah. Sorry.
HITT.
Yes, exactly. I think that's, in some rides, I think that's okay. But, if you maintain a bike wheel length, and pay attention to what's going on, I think you're okay. I don't think you need a couple of bikes back or something. Then I don't know. I prefer them to ride a little bit closer than that, and I think they just need to pay attention. That's just my opinion.
Okay, well, if you see me riding a bike length back of the next person in line, that also makes me more comfortable because I can observe the road. Yep. And if somebody misses something that I'd like to avoid, at least I have a bat's chance and a blast furnace of getting around it.
Yeah, I think you have to ride at whatever. I mean, anybody has to ride at whatever comfort level is good for them. So I understand. Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So, Mary, I think that's it as far as the questions that I've seen. Unless anybody else has any.
Can I mention something? Because especially for the newer riders to the club, and I don't know if everybody knows the website really well. There's a lot on our TCBC website, but under resources, if you go to policies, there's ride safety rules and regulations, and so there's recommendations that these are sent out when people are newly registered to the club. But I don't know if a lot of people read it, but there's recommendations before riding and recommendations while riding, as far as ride safety rules and recommendations, and those are all good because we didn't cover about not calling out all clear, because we know we're all responsible for ourselves. It's not that we're not being polite, we don't have to be polite, it's just don't ever say no, all clear, because it could not be clear in an instant. And then the no arrow bars, and hands on the handlebars at all times. I mean, no handed riding. But anyway, a lot of those things are in here, and for people who are not aware of that, and a lot of the things we talked about too. So, all right.
Thanks, Jean. Those are really good points that I didn't cover in our questions, and I'm glad you brought them up.
Okay, well, thanks, Mary. I want to big thanks again to Paul, Jean, Carol, and Scott for speaking to us, and Mary for coordinating and moderating the program tonight. Some really great information. Also, a big thanks to all of you for attending the session of TCBC Bike University. The recording will be up shortly after it's uploaded to our TCBC YouTube channel. The link will be in the notes for the session on the Bike U webpage. The TCBC Bike U Council of Regents is working on other sessions for this fall. For this year, we are in progress on sessions on the TCBC swap meet, professional bike fitting, and possible bicycle safety. If you have other ideas for programs, please write to us at bikeu@biketcbc.org, and the council will discuss them at our next meeting. We meet monthly, except in the summer when we don't have programming. So thank you again for attending, and we hope to see you all again next time.